Hello everyone, it's Chris here and welcome again to another one of my movie review videos. And in this video, I'm going to be reviewing two movies which I saw recently, neither of which really warranted their own individual video, but I figured I'm going to be let me talk about both of them right now in this video. And actually at the time I'm recording this video, I can actually talk about sort of the box office for both of these movies and how they sort of, what they mean for sort of movies in general these days, things going forward, and how they relate to a much bigger movie that's been out recently. I think you know what I'm talking about. So let's go ahead and start with our first movie, and that is Tomb Raider, the Tomb Raider reboot that came out a couple weeks ago. Now, with this Tomb Raider movie, look, we all know the track record of video game movies. The track record is absolutely terrible, especially recently. All the stuff they've tried has just been terrible. Whether you're talking about some of your earlier adaptations of Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, or the recent Assassin's Creed movie that they tried a couple years ago, which just got terrible reviews and which was a big flop. Video game movies are usually just sort of dead on arrival. They're just always, almost always, actually pretty much always bad. So with this movie, The Tomb Raider, from the first trailers I saw, I did think, oh man, this does not look good at all. But as more footage got released, I did start getting the feeling that, you know what, maybe this could be decent. And maybe with those first trailers, I just had that video games, that thought of just like, oh, this is just going to be bad just because this is a video game movie. But my thinking sort of shifted as more footage came along. And I do have to say, after seeing the movie, I indeed believe the hype. This movie is actually pretty solid, I think. It's pretty decent, not terrible at all. Now that is high praise talking about a video game movie, saying that it being pretty decent is like the greatest thing ever. But that's truly the case when it comes to video game movies. And for this movie right here, it's not bad at all. I didn't think so. Even judging it, like I said, judging it by video game standards, it's amazing. By regular movie standards, it's pretty solid. It's really, for me, it's just nothing's gonna blow you away, but I just think it's a solid movie all around. I mean, you're talking about Tomb Raider, Laura Craft. The star of this movie is played by Alicia Vikander. I think she does a good job in the role. She pulls off the physicality. She's got the look, just the acting, whatever acting you need to play Laura Croft. She does it pretty well, and she's good as the lead. The only thing that I thought was a little weird was sort of her scream. She has a really sort of girlish, high pitched scream, which every time you hear it, it feels like she's in just such pain, but in sort of an awkward way, where it's like, oh God, don't scream that way. But yeah, Vikander as Laura Croft, I think she did a pretty good job as being sort of a totally different from the Jolie Laura Croft, which this movie is trying to be more like the new Tomb Raider games, which they did that pretty well. And just all the stuff elements in this movie. I mean, the action sequences are actually pretty fun. Some of them are kind of brutal in a good way. The fisticuff scenes, that's good. The set pieces. And the movie, it's got a decent story and villains to boot. Some of the supporting characters are kind of good, like her Asian friend. I really liked him. And sort of her father, I thought was good. And sort of the main villain of the movie, I thought he was, all the stuff, all the elements were like, okay, this is solid. So in the end, nothing's gonna blow you away with this movie, as I said earlier. But if you're seeing it as like a matinee, just sort of looking just to chill out in the theaters, watch a movie, I think it's a solid experience and one that I was like, okay, here we go. This is probably your best video game movie ever made right here. And with a 50% on Rotten Tomatoes, that's pretty much the case right there. Critics seem to enjoy it, and I enjoyed it for what it was. So I'm gonna give it a 7 out of 10, which is a solid. Which that score means it's a solid movie, solid, good-ish movie, and good. I'll just call the movie good, whatever. Now, as for the box office for this one, on its opening weekend, which was a couple weeks ago now, the 23 million opening weekend came out second place to Black Panther, which forget being second place, 23 million. That's definitely probably not what they were hoping for. I'm thinking, okay, with the Tomb Raider reboot, it's got to do like 40 million for the execs at Warner Brothers to be satisfied, and it indeed did not do that. But internationally, it's doing really well. I mean, it's gotten over 200 million worldwide right now. So this may end up being another franchise like Resident Evil or Underworld, where it just survives on that worldwide box office. If they go through with a sequel, which this movie definitely does some major sequel baiting at the end, which is understandable. Something like this, you definitely want a franchise to keep going. So, yeah, that's it for Tomb Raider. Solid experience overall. And moving on to our next movie, and that next movie would be Pacific Rim Uprising, the sequel to 2013's Pacific Rim. The movie, which didn't was not a box office hit in the U.S., but a lot of people who did like it, sort of nerds of robots and kaiju, just ended up loving the movie. It was a big hit internationally, which is why we're getting a sequel right now. And the movie, the first Pacific Rim, was liked by a lot of people. When it comes to the critic reviews for the movie, I get the feeling that a lot of critics, the general consensus that I saw a lot was, well, at least it's not Transformers. That's sort of what you heard a whole lot at the time when the movie came out. And as a defender of the Transformers films, what I will say is that the first Pacific Rim did a good job of giving you those robot fights and that sort of action and visuals, while not giving you a whole bunch of the stupid, sort of annoying stuff that is admittedly in the Transformers movies. First Pacific Rim was a nice movie that gave you what you wanted without sort of feeding you what you did not want at the same time. And for me, my feelings of the first Pacific Rim was it was definitely a real fun experience when the robots and all that's well Jaegers the Jaegers, not robots, Jaegers and robots, Jaegers, whatever, when they're on the screen doing their thing, it's a blast to watch, man. It's so cool. The visuals with the kaiju. Film was directed by Guillermo del Toro. As we all know, he's great when it comes to visuals and monsters, and just a combination of that in that first Pacific Rim movie was just great. Those fights were just amazing. But he didn't come back to direct this second one. It's directed by another guy named Stephen DeKnight, and this sequel stars John Boyega. He's coming in as the new lead, and it's just a story about him sort of getting involved in the whole Jaeger battle, the uprising, the return of the kaiju. How they're coming back, we don't know. You'll have to see the movie, but the whole thing is just gathering a whole bunch of new soldiers to sort of take on this uprising of kaiju. And this movie, a comparison I've seen is it getting compared to Independence Day Resurgence. If you guys seen that one, as sort of a low rent sequel to the first one. And I do have to say that description does kind of fit, just because this movie, in comparison, it does sort of feel like a direct to DVD sequel to the first Pacific Rim. I mean, just because the movie, just the story, the way it's done is just not as good. It's just not a good all around story. You don't really get a whole lot of great characters. I mean, John Boyega, he's a good lead. I mean, we see he's a likable, charismatic guy in Star Wars, and this one you get to see him. It's the first time I saw a movie with him using his British accent. He's a charismatic guy, but there's just not a whole lot to this character. Not a whole lot to any of the characters in this movie, to be honest. And the thing is that when you have that, there's just not a whole lot of reason to care. Even though it's not like you don't like these kids, they're likable kids, and I did have fun watching them at certain points. There's just not a whole lot to There's just not a whole lot of substance to this movie. Is the biggest problem. But when you're talking about Pacific Rim, it's all about how those fights and the fights in this movie, man, they still deliver. I mean, something different from the first one is that we get to see Jaeger versus Jaeger, and that's really cool. The choreography is a lot of fun with that. But then, of course, you do get your Jaeger kaiju fight. And sort of the main one that you get, the big end battle, is truly amazing, man. What I really enjoyed about the first Pacific Rim with those battles is just the scale. I mean, comparing this to Transformers, the scale of these Jaegers and these monsters, they're just like 100 times bigger than the Transformers. So you just get such epic destruction with these battles. It's just like they're just decimating cities like it's nothing. But those visuals, the amount of detail that goes into that destruction is just so damn cool. And you can't help but just smile when you're watching that. Even though the movie that you're watching around it isn't all that great, it's still fun to watch with those fights. And the other interesting thing about this movie is that it does have a pretty noticeable twist in it that I've seen some people go back and forth how they feel about it. And for me, the twist, and if you see the movie, you know what I'm talking about. it fits. It like it to me. It's not like it doesn't make sense. There's a logical explanation for it. It's something that was established in the first movie, and when I saw it in this, I'm like, okay, that's actually kind of clever. And I sort of like it when movies take risks like that with twists. I don't like seeing cookie cutter stuff all the time, which is sort of a direct line of how things were going to go. So the twist in this movie, I didn't mind at all. The fights I really enjoyed. But overall, there's just not a whole lot of substance to this movie, is the problem. And the first movie, by comparison, was definitely a much better all around movie. Even though I didn't hate watching this one, the first one was definitely a lot better. So I'm gonna end up giving it a 6 out of 10, which is sort of the bare requirement for me, sort of kind of recommending it. If you really like those fights and you want to see that stuff, that's for you. Definitely see it. But if you're someone who didn't really care much for the first Pacific Rim at all, definitely skip out on this one, because this one is definitely not as good a movie, and you just won't get a whole lot of this one except the fights. Which that end battle is amazing, but it's not going to be a whole lot. It's not going to be enough for most people. So when it comes to the box office for this one ended up doing 28 million opening weekend, and the budget for this one was 150 million. Which at 28 million, that's lower than what the first one did. The first one did in the 30 millions. I can't remember the exact number, but yeah, the first one wasn't a big hit either, but this one did even lower, and they were trying to bank on sort of the star power of John Boyega as a lead now. And yeah, that's not a good number for this one at all. It was the movie that finally unseat Black Panther at the box office, but that ain't saying much just because Black Panther had been at the top for 5 weeks, and in the 6th week it finally got put off. So yeah, that just goes to show. I don't know if Black Panther's dominance, which that's what's this is what I really wanted to talk about. I don't know if it has so much to do with how good Black Panther is, like, because Black Panther is a great movie. Is the movie making that much money because it is a really good movie, or is it the fact that there's just some weak competition stuff that people did not want to see, like Tomb Raider or Pacific Rim, or movies I didn't see like Red Sparrow? Is that what it is? I'm actually inclined to believe that it is because Black Panther was so good and such a cultural phenomenon. Because Black Panther was a really just damn good movie that everyone was talking about. So I think a lot of people felt obligated to see that one, and for good reason, because that is a great movie. And I think that's sort of why these last 2 weeks for movies, Tomb Raider and Pacific Rim, did sort of suffer just because Black Panther is such a juggernaut that everyone wants to see, and for good reason. Even though I didn't think Tomb Raider and Pacific Rim were the worst movies ever. Actually, I got a kick out of both of them. Like I said, they're not great movies. You still think they would have done a little better with something like Black Panther being in its 5th and 6th weekend, respectively. But anyway, there's that. So there's the reviews for Tomb Raider and Pacific Rim. Recommendations for both, even though I think Tomb Raider is definitely the better movie. And as Pacific Rim Uprising, it all depends on how you feel about the first Pacific Rim, to be honest. So I hope you all enjoyed this review. Leave your comments and tell me what you thought about these movies if you've seen them, and I'll see y'all around with another video.